And good afternoon. Welcome to Deering Live, everybody. How's it all going? I hope everybody is safe and well on this delightful Thursday. I really don't need to introduce this next gentleman, Mr. Tony Trischka. Our guest, obviously, today, referred to NPR as the great banjo liberationist, known as the father of modern bluegrass. He's a living legend of banjo and in music in general. He is also the only guest to appear on Deering Live for a second time today, which is very exciting. And we'll be talking about all things banjo, as well as his brand new album, Shall We Hope. Please welcome Mr. Tony Trischka. Tony, how are you?
Very good, Jamie. Thank you so much. It's a beautiful day here in northern Jersey, a beautiful sunny day in the 70s. We needed it.
Is it dry, humid? How are we feeling?
Very dry. It's just a perfect day. Couldn't be better.
Very good. And my co-host, Mr. David Bandrowski, joins us. He's back in safe Buenos Aires, still live from the south. But welcome back, Dave.
Good to see both of y'all.
Now, before we get in, I'm going to invite you to play a song in a minute. But right before we went live, you were playing a little ditty, and that little ditty was our Deering phone number. Can you demonstrate what we're talking about? Because it was cool. What's the Deering phone number is?
It's a very cool number. What I have is, well, forget the 800 number because zeros are tough to deal with, but 845-7791. That's 845-7791.
Nicely done.
And what you can do, one strategy for writing tunes, composing tunes, banjo tunes or anything, is to take each number of a phone number and assign a note to it. In other words, 8 would be the octave. Let's say you're in, surprisingly, G, because I don't think I've ever played in G, but this is a grand experiment. Anyway, there's 8, there's the octave, and then 4, 8, 4, 5, 8, 4 is the fourth note of the scale, C. D is the fifth, the open first string. And then 7, 7, I'll choose the flatted seventh. And it's twice, 7, 7, 9, there's the ninth note of the scale, and 1. I didn't have a chance to really come up with a whole tune, but moments before, I figured, let me see what their phone numbers. It's a really nice phone number you got there.
We specifically chose that phone number to make it sound as pretty as it could. In Tony Trischka's,
all the phone numbers in my phone, that was the prettiest, so I chose. Happened to be, yeah. Totally, just coincidence.
We appreciate that, Tony. Thank you very much. And maybe we'll contract you out for some hold music or something. That could be fun. But let's. How about we start off with a tune? I'm gonna change your mic settings, and I'll let you have a little play.
Okay, I'll start with a Bill Monroe tune that he wrote in 1966 for his banjo player Lamar Greer, who was a big influence on me actually. And David Greer's dad, if you're familiar with David Greer's, he's totally amazing, one of the best bluegrass guitarists who ever lived. Anyway, Bill Monroe wrote this tune called "Crossing the Cumberlands," which unfortunately he never recorded with Lamar, but I'll play a little bit of it for you right now.
was
Clearly,
fantastic.
that's a great lonesome tune. Thank you, Bill Monroe, for composing that.
What recording is that on?
That's a really good
You know?
question. I don't think you can get any Bill Monroe albums anymore. It's actually, you can find it on YouTube with Lamar Greer. It's a live recording with Lamar Greer and Byron
Okay.
Burrow fiddle. That would probably be the best place to get it. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, let's jump right in and talk about your album that was released, recently, and I know you've been working on it for a long time, and I'd love to, for you to tell us about it.
The album is called Shall We Hope, and I started working on it about 12 years ago. On my last album before this one, which is called Great Big World, I wrote a couple of vocals on there, one of which was Wild Bill Hickok, telling the story of that Western lawman, and sort of got me into the head of writing lyrics. And so for some reason, I just decided I'm going to write a song about a riverboat gambler. And I took the paradigm or the setting of a Jimmy Rogers Blue Yodel and just wrote some lyrics to it. And then that was that song. And then I just decided, and at this point, I'm in the mid 1800s. And then I decided I would write a song about a woman coming from Ireland and meeting this riverboat gambler, leaving in the 1840s because of the potato famine and going on what was called a coffin ship, because not all the immigrants from Ireland would make the crossing of the Atlantic. Anyway, and that's how this whole thing started. And after a while, I realized this is developing into a story. And then I wrote a song about the General, which is this, there was this hijacking of a train. I think it was in 1862, if I remember correctly. Union spies hijacked a Confederate train, and they were headed north up to northern Georgia to tie up railroad tracks and rip up railroad tracks and cut down telegraph wires to allow for an attack by a Union general. And it just went on from there. And I could give you more details, but that kind of sets the story, at least in a little bit. I was trying to have a through story where these characters would appear throughout. And I was very fortunate. I guess I'll just continue here since I have the floor. I wanted to have some aspect of enslaved Africans as part of the story. And I happened to be visiting some friends in Asheville, North Carolina. And the husband was and still is a history professor at Warren and Wilson College, where the Swannanoa Gathering happens every year, although virtually this year. And he said that he and his students had been clearing this slave graveyard on the outskirts of Asheville, and would I like to see it the next morning? I said, of course, I would love to see it. And we went out there, and it was just this very powerful experience. It was behind this small church, and there was just this open space with mostly just rocks, just stones on the ground. And it turned out that there was a gentleman named George Avery who was a grave digger for this plantation in that area at that time in the 1840s, 1850s into the 1860s. And when enslaved Africans on this plantation died, they'd be put in a wicker basket and buried under the ground. And a stone would be put over their head with no inscription, just a stone. Someone's buried here, that sort of thing. And this history professor did a seismographic reading and discovered that there were 1,900 souls buried under the ground. And anyway, I could go on, but it was a very powerful experience. And I ended up writing actually a total of 3 songs based on this gentleman, George Avery. I changed his name to John Boston, who was another enslaved African, I conflated the 2 personalities to create the story. But anyway, that was the genesis of that part of the story.
Do you write stories, just non-musical stories, just for yourself? This is kind of a first for you a little bit.
Of this sort of thing and this expansive thing, it was the first thing. I've written one short story in my life, which was many, many years ago. My father and I had driven down to Florida to visit my sister who was living there, and we ate at a Denny's and waited an hour to be served and get our food. And I was so frustrated that I wrote a short story about it. I don't think it'll ever see the light of day, needless to say.
Yeah, that's fine. And you use a lot of different banjos. It's not a banjo album, I would say, but it is used a number of different banjo sounds on this recording. What were some of the different banjos that you used?
Well, let's see. I use this one right here. This is my signature model, Golden Clipper. And for the bluegrass-oriented tunes, I use this.
Mm-hmm.
And I also use this one here, which is a Vega, but Deering bought the Vega company because Vega, I think they were, well, first it was Vega out of Boston, like in the early 1900s. So they were bought by the Martin Guitar Company. And then they sold it to someone in Korea who really didn't know what they were doing with the banjos and didn't do a very good job, apparently. And then Greg and Janet Deering bought it from the Korean company and started making really nice Vega banjos again. So it's a Deering Vega, basically. And it's still on strong, so it has kind of a sweet sound to it.
Do you want to?
Yeah.
While you have that banjo in hand, do you want to play a tune with it since we're here?
Yeah, you set this up perfectly, Dave. I was. It's tough because I'm not a singer, and I won't bludgeon you with my voice, any of you folks. But there's only one instrumental on the album. I decided I wanted to write a Civil War sounding march, and I listened to a bunch of reenactors. And there are all these marches you can find on YouTube of these brass bands doing, the music's written out from that time period. And I listened to a bunch of those and then just sat down and wrote something in the spirit of those tunes, which I call the Big Round Top March, which is a location in Gettysburg at the battlefield, the Big Round Top. And so that's how I named this. And I was fortunate enough, besides playing this banjo, I got a gentleman named Van Dyke Parks out in LA, who is one of my big culture heroes. He put out an amazing album in 1967, I want to say, called Song Cycle. And if you're familiar with Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, they were supposed to put out an album called Smile, and Van Dyke had written all the lyrics for it. It was a very visionary thing, competing with the Beatles. But it never came out till more recent years. But anyway, I got Van Dyke Parks to write an arrangement for us, a whole brass band, basically, which you will not hear right now. You'll just hear the banjo part, but the whole brass band is on the album. Here we go.
Nice.
Thank you.
And I'm curious about because with the brass band orchestration, how the process went for you getting the music to Van Dyke. Did you record a scratch track of the tune and then he composed the music for it, or how'd that come about?
That's how it worked out. I just I played exactly this on my phone, just very loose, and just sent it to him. And he came out with this remarkable piece of music. Again, I think it was an 8-piece band, mostly horns, and there's some flute, some piccolo, and a bass drum, and a snare drum. And Van Dyke is he's a very amazing, quirky, deep musician, and he likes calypso music. So in the middle of his arrangement, there are a few moments where you hear this calypso feel, which is totally anachronistic because that was not happening in 1863. But it's just like, wait, what? But in doing this album, I was not trying to write in the style of that time. This is the only thing that's really kind of in the style of that. There's one other tune that is also, maybe 2 tunes out of all of them. But I was just kind of writing however I felt the music should be for that particular kind of a tune. And there are 2 tunes that have string quartet arrangements with them that a friend of mine put together, a guy named Greg Pliska. So it's a very eclectic album, to say the least.
Yeah, because there's all these different orchestration throughout it, and kind of going back to the recording process, so they would send you a like a finale, a MIDI sample of the orchestrated parts, and then you'd approve it, and then you'd hire the musicians and record that. Is that what happened?
Well, actually, it's a gentleman named Greg Pliska. I did this thing in Central Park with the public theater. It's called Shakespeare in the Park, and there's a version of As You Like It by Shakespeare. They do this every summer. It's a free series, and Steve Martin had written some of the music for it, and had asked me to put a band together for that. But the incidental music was done by a guy named Greg Pliska, who's an amazing orchestrator and arranger, and I became friendly with him. So when it came time I decided I want to have string quartet arrangements for 2 of the tunes. So I just got together with him because he lives in New York City and I'm close by. So I would go and play the music for him, and we would kick some ideas around. And then he would send me a MIDI file, and I would listen to it and say, yeah, that sounds great, or let's change this. Mostly it was all great. He did just a remarkable job. And then he contracted out the musicians. So I just put it all in his hands, and he handled the whole thing. And he handled he got these amazing, classical musicians, 2 violinists, a cello and a viola. And they just sat down and nailed it in, half an hour. It just sounded perfect with all the emotion. So.
And do they play to your banjo track, or do you play to their track?
I played to their track. There was a click track, so it would just be them, and then I overdubbed my part to go with them. And
Gotcha.
Just the simplest way to do it. Just so we would have to wait for me to make sure mine was right, and let's just get them done first. But yeah, that's exactly how it happened. Yeah.
Okay. And I know this recording took you a number of years to complete, but you persevered and completed it, which is really admirable. What kind of advice do you have for artists that are struggling to complete a work like this, and they're just kind of stuck in a spot and it's not finishing, but not just throwing it away and moving on?
Yeah, I mean, if you believe in it, I mean, for me, it was partly I'd spent so many years at it, and this isn't like every day working 8 hours a day for 12 years. It was, I had other projects I'd go on the road, but for me, what worked, and this is more of I hate to call it a concept album, but it tells a story and has characters that occur throughout the story. And for me, I love history, and so it fascinated me to be researching these tunes. So my interest kept expanding. As I said, when I went to that enslaved graveyard, the whole thing just opened up. It gave me 3 new tunes, basically. Inspired me to write 3 new tunes. Mm-hmm. One of which I only found the lyrics for, but that's another story. To stay inspired, it depends on what the project is. For me, it was a historically based thing. And like I said, I love history, so I would research things. One of the other major things was while I was researching, I found this on YouTube. I found a reunion in 1938, the 75th reunion of soldiers who had survived the Battle of Gettysburg, and it's this old video. Again, they met in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and these are soldiers on both Union and Confederate sides, and they show up, these gentlemen who are like in their late 80s, early mid 90s. They're getting off a train, and hobbling along in canes or on a wheelchair. And then you see them shaking hands across this stone wall at the Gettysburg battlefield that they had fought over 70 years before, shaking hands. And it was just, not that their attitudes had changed, but they're in their 90s, and here they are healing. It's a healing moment. And that became a very important part of the story for me. And then, as it turns out, in this day and age where we're so divided, that we can still respect each other. And even if we have different opinions, we can still respect each other for who we are. And that kind of became an unintentional theme, but kind of, for the present time, it seems appropriate. I guess I should say that. I'm not trying to up on a soapbox and make a statement, but it just by happen chance worked out that way. And I also I wanted to write a Christmas tune based on how Christmases were spent in the Civil War. And it was a day where there was no fighting, at least in this particular thing that I was researching. And people would be playing games in this encampment. But it was Christmas cheer this weary year, because the year before these people had been home with their families. And now it's certainly not that way. They're at war. But the general idea of Christmas cheer this weary year, which given the pandemic, a lot of families couldn't get together. So again, surely by happenstance, it seemed to have a resonance. And we did a video on that also, which you can find on YouTube somewhere, I'm sure.
Very apropos, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little about the banjo you're holding. What kind? It's nylon strings it has on there, right?
It's nylon strung, yeah. It has this, Jens Kruger developed this thing right here, which I can't even explain exactly how it works, but it adds a lot of sustain to the instrument. It doesn't have quite the volume, but it has tons of sustain, and it's just a gorgeous sound. Maybe I'll play one more tune on this, if you don't mind, with your permission.
Go ahead. Yeah, definitely.
See if I can get through this. I started writing a lot of banjo tunes during the pandemic when things first started a year ago, and still am, for that matter. And this is one of them. It's kind of in the style of a turn-of-the-century parlor tune. And it doesn't have a name yet, but let's see.
Very nice.
Thank you.
And what tuning was that? Was that drop C that you went to?
It's drop C tuning, yes. It's like a G tuning, but with a fourth string tuned down to C. And for this tune, I decided I would grab some techniques that they use for that style of music, the parlor style. The very first Edison cylinders featured banjo music playing in this style. And one thing that they would do a lot is have triplet feels like. That's one thing. And then there's another thing where they would go. Kind of hitting two strings, having one note staying the same while the others change, or while like the second string changes. If I can remember this tune. I have this online banjo school, and I have a tune in there, if I can think of it. I can't remember it now, but it's a tune from like the 1920s, and it's in that kind of have a melody here, and then it goes down. In fact, I'll play. Can I play one more tune?
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just turn off my tweet thing here. Okay. This is called the Plantation Symphony. And this was what was going on in 1902, let's say. This is a tune from then. And it has a little bit of the melodic style in it. Again, kind of the smoking gun, showing that melodic style was being done much earlier than we thought. Anyway, you get the idea. But business here, where it almost sounds like two banjos, and that was the idea. They would sometimes try to do things that sounded like two banjos. So you're hitting the third string with the thumb, and then going back and forth between the index and middle on the first string. Anyway, that kind of a sound.
Yeah, it. But I noticed it had a lot of chord melody sort of structure to it, and then but then that technique you just showed that reminds me of like a classical guitar kind of fingering right hand thing to kind of do hit the one string with two fingers back.
Yeah, this style of music would borrow what they would be playing on these banjos, these 5-string banjos. They'd be doing marches, light classical music, and rags. Mm-hmm. And so there was definitely, and in fact, this banjo instruction book from 1865, before that, at least in books, people were doing what we today call clawhammer, downstroke style. But in 1865, this book, midway through the book, they talked about the guitar style. They called it guitar style, and it was a finger-picking style. And so they were definitely borrowing from the guitar. In fact, the tune I wrote that I played earlier, the very beginning, I happened to be checking out an Andres Segovia masterclass on YouTube, and he talks about hitting the third string and then pinching the first two strings. And I wanted an introduction to this tune, and I saw that, oh my gosh, I'm going to steal that from Andres Segovia and put it in this tune. Tuning, but this business is stolen directly from classical guitar, which is where I got the idea for that.
There's somebody asking in the chat why you aren't using finger picks on this banjo.
Because at least, well, again, the first tune I played, the tune for the March, was from 1865, in that style. And they didn't use fingerpicks there. And they didn't use fingerpicks in the turn of the century music. And fingerpicks probably didn't come until like the later 20s or mid to later 30s. Although in the downstroke style, just to get historical for a second, this book from 1865 where it talked about that guitar style, in that same book, they had an outline of a pick that you would use for the downstroke style that you could put on your index finger. So at least as early as 1865, there were finger picks, or a finger pick for your index finger to hit down with to get a little more power. But anyway, this turn of the century style, which I really love and play a number of tunes in that style, they didn't use finger picks. It was just bare fingers. And it's really nice to just have bare fingers in touch with strings for this kind of a banjo, the nylon strung, as opposed to this banjo where it's nice to be able to, punch out the sound with finger picks. So that's why, because I'm playing in a style where they did not originally use finger picks.
And quickly before we leave the nylon string banjo, what strings are you using on there?
Believe it or not, these are the strings that came with it. So you can ask Janet and Greg what they put on this. So I honestly don't know. I don't know the company. And I've had this for like 7 years or something, and they're still holding up just fine. So
I believe it's Aquila Nile gut strings, but I'm not 100% sure.
Oh, okay. Do you folks carry those?
We don't have them in stock right now, but we're working on it.
Ordered 5 pairs, so maybe we can use the phone conversation.
We can make that happen, Tony.
Sorry?
Yeah, we'll make that happen for you. They are Aquila Nile gut strings. We use them on the ukuleles, Banjo ukuleles that we make. So yeah, those are our go-to nylon strings.
Good. Yeah, I could use a couple pair of those.
Yeah. All right.
Wheeling
and dealing live on air. I'm leaving.
My credit card number is 327. Oh, no, never mind.
Just write it in a song and we'll get it.
I was just going to say, can you please put that into some kind of melody so we can all try and interpret your credit card details, and then
of course, absolutely.
The winner can spend whatever they want.
Yeah. The expiration date is. There you go.
Do you want to play a tune on the steels, the more classic, the bluegrass style banjo that we have, and so then people can hear the difference, right? ABM.
Sure. I could do something that I'm a little nervous about playing because I don't know if I can get through the whole thing. But if that's okay, if I have a train wreck, that's okay.
It's all right.
If I have a train wreck, I'll go
to see that we all make mistakes.
Yeah. This is an arrangement of. I did a show with Mark O'Connor. It was me and Mark O'Connor. Who else was on? Jay and Molly Unger, Jimmy Gaudreau, Mike Aldridge, and we were all playing solo except for Jay and Molly, and we all played what we played, and it was a nice audience, full audience, and Mark went out and played this partita that he had composed and was just blowing people away with his amazing, amazing technique. He was playing beautifully. And I decided I should have something that's more of a showy kind of a tune to fulfill that function when I do a solo show. And I decided to do variations on Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. But it never became too flashy. But this is my rendition of that. I think a guy named Mozart did the same thing a few years before I did it, though. So anyway, here we go. Okay, now I can breathe.
Fantastic. How do you remember all these tunes that you play? Because you play in a lot of different styles, and do you just keep working, dust them off every day, or how do you keep them all from just kind of fading and getting
Don't
dusty?
ask me that question. That's the most dangerous thing. That happens to me when I do solo shows sometimes. I'm in the midst of playing something like this, and I think, how do I remember all this? And that's really going to get a train wreck. Some certain like this, I need to kind of warm up on a little bit. I've played it a lot just to keep it in my fingers, and I would use it a lot as a warm-up exercise before I do various things. And I played it a couple of times just earlier today, just as a refresher. And then there are other tunes like that Plantation Symphony tune from 1902 that it's just in there. I didn't warm up on that, and I missed one thing or something. But there's certain things I played enough, and they just kind of stick in your head. And that Bill Monroe tune is one of my all-time favorite tunes. So, and it was an interesting story. This was 1966, and I was living in Syracuse, New York. I was 17 at the time, and we had been at the 1966 the second 3-day bluegrass festival ever in Fincastle, Virginia, and we were friendly with Pete Rowan, who was playing with Bill Monroe at the time. And it turns out they were going to be in Rochester, New York. So our guitar player asked Pete Rowan to ask Bill Monroe if he would come for dinner at our guitar player's parents' house before the show. And Bill Monroe agreed. So we get to our guitar player's parents' house, and there's the bluegrass bus out in front with the Tennessee plates and 2 steer horns on the front, one of which was broken off. And we go in there, and there's Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys in our guitar player's parents' house, all dressed up in suits and ties. And we had a chance to play with Bill just before dinner, played a couple of tunes with him. And then he was drinking a little bit of a glass of red wine, and talked about how he had a hound dog when he was living in Chicago in the 30s with his brothers. He had a hound dog that could trace the scent of a rabbit through the streets of Chicago if the scent was 3 weeks old. He told that story. And then we had dinner. And then afterwards, Bill said, would you like us to play for you? And we said, nah, don't bother. No, we said, yeah, that'd be nice. And Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys in our guitar player's parents' living room stood and played requests for about 20 minutes while we just sat on the living room couch. And one of the songs they played was that Crossing the Cumberlands. And then we got to ride over to the gig in the bluegrass bus. And the banjo player, Lamar Greer, as I mentioned earlier, he was the bus driver. It's always the banjo player who's the bus driver. And he's in the middle of this major downtown street. And they made a wrong turn. So we had to do a U-turn in the bluegrass bus, the bluegrass breakdown, as they used to call it, and head off to the gig. And then the gig was amazing also. Richard Green was playing fiddle at that time. And it was just an amazing band. So
that's a fantastic story.
One of those life-changing moments.
Yeah. It's why is the banjo player always the bus driver?
I don't know. Well, Bill Monroe used to call the banjo the fifth child. In fact, one of his banjo players, Butch Robbins, great banjo player, had an album called The Fifth Child. And apparently, because when Bill Monroe started the Bluegrass Boys in around 1938, went on the Grand Ole Opry doing Mule Skinner Blues, and it was fiddle, guitar, mandolin, and bass. There was no banjo. And in 1942, he had a 4-string banjo player playing with him. And then apparently again in 1944, I think just before Earl Scruggs joined, and a little before that string bean, Dave Aikman was playing 5-string banjo, some 2-finger and maybe some clawhammer also. But Bill Monroe actually did have 2 different 4-string banjo players with him at one time in the 40s. I'd love to have heard what that was. But,
wow.
There's
no recordings of that.
There probably are. I think like the Country Music Hall of Fame or the Opry has all that. There are recordings from the 40s you can hear. So I would really be curious to hear that myself.
Was it a tenor banjo or a plectrum? Do you know?
I'm not sure. Which it was. I'm guessing tenor, but I don't really know for a fact.
Yeah.
For a fact. But I should probably play an Earl Scruggs thing, shouldn't I? Would that be appropriate?
Sure, go ahead.
I mean, I've got this bluegrass banjo here, so. I had a chance to hang out with Earl on a number of occasions. One story he told me was that I can't remember the name of it, Banjo Man or something like that. It was a documentary about Earl Scruggs, and paired him with, or connected him with, various people, including Bob Dylan. Earl played Nashville Skyline Rag with Bob Dylan on this film, and got together with the Byrds with Clarence White on electric guitar. And they were getting these various people to play with Earl. And one time, Earl told me that Ravi Shankar was in Nashville doing a concert, and they tried to get a film crew together to film Earl and Ravi Shankar playing together, sitar and banjo. And Ravi came over to Earl's house along with his tabla player, Ala Raka, and they jammed for a while. They couldn't get the film crew, but they jammed. Earl said they jammed for a while. And then afterwards, Earl said, "Would you like to eat something?" And all Ravi Shankar wanted to have was Kentucky Fried Chicken. So they ordered some tubs of flan and mashed potatoes and chicken, and sat on the floor and ate KFC. But I sure would like to have been a fly on the wall to hear what that sounded like.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'll play two tunes in drop C tuning again. One of which is something that Earl never officially recorded, although it ended up on the Live at Carnegie Hall show, the full extended version with everything on it, which you can still get. And it's called "You Can't Stop Me From Dreaming." And it's one of the two tunes he would play along with Darling Pal of Mine, that he would play with Jake Tulloch, the bass player for Flat and Scruggs. And they would do it as a bass banjo duet. And anyway, I'll play that. Maybe I'll play one other tune after that. But I'll play a little bit of "You Can't Stop Me From Dreaming." And the coolest thing about that first tune, "Can't Stop Me From Dreaming," Earl goes at the end, which is the craziest ending I've ever heard. And if you go to, it's one of the Martha White videos that you can find on YouTube. And they do that there. It's one of the earliest videos, and they have these really cool white suits on. And it's just Earl and cousin Jake playing bass and banjo. And at the end, Earl ended it like that. And that's the weirdest ending. And then I started thinking, why did he do that? And I realized it's like the bass goes root 5, and Earl was just imitating that on the banjo. Coolest thing.
This is why sometimes you're playing in drop C. Why, if you're composing a tune or deciding to play in drop C, why would you use drop C possibly instead of double C or another C tuning?
There's full C. Well, there's drop C, there's double C, and then full C. Drop C is just the fourth string down to C. Double C is second string up to C, and then sometimes first string up to E. But I'm not going to mess with that.
Yeah.
I'll never be in tune again. But this double C, which is really one of my favorite tunes, and I might get lucky and be able to play something, if we have time, in double C. which is just a beautiful tuning to play out of. Are there any questions, by the way, out there from
We
folks?
do have somebody asking about some. I saw quickly talking about. Are there Tony Trischka socks out there?
I'm not wearing them now. I'm not. There have been on my website. There's a link. We started a store recently, which has been taken over by someone else. But I think there's still maybe some socks there, some banjo socks. Yes,
They're
in fact,
amazing.
there are.
They're amazing. They're amazing socks.
I think that they're actually a very good sock. Not that I'm here to shill socks, but
Shill
they're very
socks.
sturdy, and I haven't worn them out. And I go through socks pretty quickly. But these, they last, and they're very comfortable too.
To be clear, though, they're new socks. They're not your socks, right?
Well, I like weird socks. I like fancy socks. And so at one point I said, I got to get some socks, to sell at gigs. And so my wife was the organizational genius behind it and found a really good company. She's good at researching these things and found a company that made really good socks. And we asked her to sample pair and they sent 2 different unmatching socks. Why would they do that? But anyway, yes, I've carried socks. I'm into haberdashery these days. T-shirts are nice, but socks are better, I think, personally.
I didn't jump in there to talk about socks real quick before you start the tune.
Yes.
We have another chat room, and Michael is asking about, just very quickly, on the nylon strings. Do you recommend them for claw hammer, and are they hard to get used to if you've been playing steel strings for so long? What are your thoughts on that?
For claw hammer, I mean, it depends on I would say, I've not tried claw hammer. I just did for a moment, I think. But I guess, I'm not that up on nylon strings, but I would think you can get different gauges. You guys might know more about this than I do. Are there heavy gauge nylon strings? Or if you're going to do something like claw hammer, you might want a slightly heavier gauge, I would think.
Yeah.
You could do it. You might have to just hit it a little bit more lightly.
Yeah.
And it's just a different thing. It's a whole other realm. I mean, I know when many years ago, I always played with picks, and I would go over and visit Bill Keith up in Woodstock, New York, and we'd hang out, and he'd play something without picks, just play some tune on his regular bluegrass banjo, steel string banjo, without picks. And then I would try it at home, and it just felt awkward to me, and it took a while to get used to not using picks on a regular bluegrass banjo, let's say. But on a nylon strung banjo, I've been doing it for so long. I think it takes a little while to get used to because there's more give. They don't resist.
That's right. The tension is not quite as great as a steel string, so it feels weird. Yeah. It's like if you go from an acoustic guitar onto a classical guitar. It just takes a little bit of getting used to. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You don't quite get that resistance, but it's a wonderful sound. It's just a different flavor. So you don't always have to be playing metal strings and. It gives you a headache after a while. Gosh.
Yeah.
So, no, it's a really pretty sound. I mean, you can just do all sorts of nice things. Maybe can I play one more thing on the nylon strung?
You can. I didn't want to interrupt you, but
No.
while you're doing that, Spooky Tooth 92 says, I want more Tony Trischka underwear. Ever since my Trischka G-string came in, I'm a way better banjo player. On that note, I'm going to duck out of this and let Dave carry on.
I'm going to play a tune for you right now. And anyway, well, there was a group out of Pennsylvania that used to, I can't remember the name of the group right now, but they had bluegrass underwear. And it said, I'm bluegrass proud for men and women, briefs and panties. And so this was like in the 80s, and they sold these at gigs. So that's the band you'd need to talk to. You talk to those folks. Well, the thing about these different instruments is it can inspire you to do all sorts of different things. So again, I wrote a tune on this banjo for my daughter Zoe. I haven't played this in a while. Let me see if I can do this cold. Talking about memorizing tunes. This is drop C. And it's a really pretty sound, with nylon strings. And, well, I'll get into that topic in a moment, but I'll play a little bit of this song, Zoe.
Very nice. That's a beautiful tune. Really is.
Thanks. And one thing for folks to think about is rather than always being right next to the bridge, you can move. And that is one thing in terms of the person that asked about nylon strings versus metal strings and making the transition. If you play close to the bridge, you will get pretty good resistance. When you get out here, which is true of a steel string banjo also, there's more give. But in general, there's, you can get a fairly good resistance if you're close to the bridge. So I don't think it's that big a difference, but there is obviously some difference. But what I wanted to say is there's a whole lot of tonal timbral range difference between here and here, which you can hear better on this banjo. And so again, with my online school, I'm often talking to people about take advantage of all that sound differential you can get when you're close to the bridge. Anyway, you're here as opposed to. Take advantage of everything that you've got here and just feel it out. There are no rules to it, except when you're doing bluegrass backup. You might want to move away from the bridge to get a sweeter sound. Earl would do that. He wouldn't always be back here. So anyway, those are my thoughts on that.
That's good advice. We are at the top of the hour, but we are starting to get a number of questions coming in. So do you want to try to get to a number of these?
Sure.
We've one question is, I'm quite familiar with the first 5 frets, but I have a lot of trouble playing in the upper notes of the fretboard. Do you have any recommendations on how to tackle learning that stuff?
It's a big topic. There are a number of ways to look at this. One way is there aren't that many up the neck breaks. I mean, Foggy Mountain Breakdown in the Earl Scruggs book has up the neck breaks. I hate to mention my school because I don't want to be just plugging it, but I do have some. If someone's on the school, I've got some up the neck breaks there, and you can just learn those and get a sense of that. But in a larger sense, if you just play the syllables of a tune, rather than trying to figure out what's going on up here and I don't know where the licks are, you don't worry about licks. You play the melody of the tune. So if you're playing "You Are My Sunshine," for instance. This is something that John Hartford used to talk about Earl doing. Earl would play the syllables of a tune. He would do something like "Country Roads." That's almost completely playing it the way you would sing it, playing the syllables of a song rather than sort of playing the melody, playing as close as you can to the way it would actually be sung, phrased. So you're playing the lyrics of the song. So if you take that concept up here, it's good to know some chords up the neck. Here's the D position G. Here's the F position C. D position, the F position D, I'm sorry. And knowing that this is the bar G, and here's C up here. I mean, if you know a couple of the chord positions up here, you can work out of them. Like "Country Roads." If you're just working out of this D position G, find the melody notes. Starts on that note there, the G, like "Country Roads," 1, 2, 3. The first, second, and third notes of the scale. "Country Roads, take me home." And here's a D chord here. You should know what the chords of the tune are. Take me home. Here's a bar D chord at the 7th fret. I take the first 2 strings out of that, which is what Earl would do. A lot of the times playing up the neck, he wouldn't use all 4 strings. He would often work off just the 1st, 2nd, and 5th strings. So, take me home. Melody notes on the 1st string here at the top. First 2 strings at the 7th fret. C. Take me home to the place. And that's an E minor chord. Just if you play Foggy Mountain Breakdown, you might know this position. Freeman to the place. I, B, back to G. And here's a G up here. The melody, I belong. And here's a C. West Virginia. Lots of times you can find nice melodies on just fretting the second string. You could also go country, all on the second string, 8, 10, and 12, and open first, second, and fifth strings. And do some forward rolls. Maybe a C there. And then West Virginia, Mountain Mama. Again, working out this D chord position, D position G. Going from the 9th to the 7th fret of the first string to the second string, 8th fret. Using the middle finger as an anchor on the second string, 8th fret. I don't know if that's helping this, without really writing out the tablature and spending a lot of time. Just in a really quick moment that hopefully gives some sense of how to work up the neck. And also you can use sixths. Interval of a sixth. If you learn those, that really helps to connect things up the neck, up and down the neck. If you take the first string, the third string open, and the first string second fret, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's the interval of a sixth, starting with the open third, counting that as 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, going up the notes of the G scale. That interval is a sixth. Now, if you start on the second note of the G scale, playing notes of the G scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, and continuing on from there, you get 0 and 2, 2 and 4. This is only on the third and first strings. 4 and 5, 5 and 7, 7 and 9. A lot of this you can just discover by ear. 9 and 10, 11 and 12, 12 and 14, 14, 16, 16, 17, 17, 19. I can't count this high. 19 and 21. And then I happen to have, because this is a fancy pants banjo, it has 2 extra frets. So I can go all the way up to there, up an octave. But using these sixths and using rolls, kind of backward, forward rolls with the fifth string, first, third, fifth, third, first, third, fifth. That's sort of a vague version of Country Roads. Country Roads with a melody note on the first string of the sixth. Anyway, those are a few ideas about playing up the neck.
It's a lot of good information there, really good ideas for people with any playing level. We have a question from Shannon O'Hare saying, I use your Artist Work series as the series you've mentioned, and it's amazing, but was curious how you feel about online banjo camps like the upcoming New Mexico Banjo Camp, and what current bands do you listen to?
Huh. Well, thank you, Shannon, for that question. I've not done a banjo camp yet. I've done these sorts of things. I've not actually done a banjo camp. The New Mexico one will be the first one, so I can't even really speak from experience. I've done workshops. I did one last week with the Old Town School of Folk Music in Chicago. I think they work, and as in here, you can ask questions. I find it a little bit strange where you just see blocks of people, and they're muted, and they're just these little blocks in the distance. I really like human interaction. I love just working with a bunch of folks in person, but of course we can't do that these days. But I mean, it does work. And what I've done I'm sure I'll be doing this with Bill Evans too, sending him tablature, which he will send out to everyone, so they'll have the tablature in advance to look through, and then I'll describe whatever I'm going to teach, I'll talk about that as it relates to the tablature. So I think it does work. Just having done a 3-hour workshop, and this is a more extended sort of thing, of course, it does work, but it's not as groovy as some people used to say in the 60s as doing it in person. But yeah, I think it does work. And what was the other part of the question? I'm sorry, there was...
What bands are you listening to?
Wow. I honestly, if you're talking about bluegrass bands, I don't listen to that much bluegrass because I listened for so many years, but I still do. And if I do, it'll be Bill Monroe, it'll be the older bands. There are a lot of great bands out there, modern bands, but for me, I have such an attachment to the older bands, and I got to see these people in person, and it just still resonates very deeply in me. I listen to Bill Monroe, I listen to Flat Scruggs, Jim and Jesse I've been listening to recently, the Osborne Brothers, Jimmy Martin I listened to recently. He has a great song called I Can't Quit Cigarettes that starts off with somebody coughing very strongly. It's a great song. Look up Jimmy Martin, I Can't Quit Cigarettes. It'll change your life, sort of. And the Osborne Brothers, Sonny, I've been in touch with Sonny somewhat recently. He's one of my big banjo heroes, and he's a really great guy. I love Sonny's music. In fact, he's putting together an album. He's been for the last number of years called Ego, and he's gotten, because he's not playing anymore because he had a rotator cuff injury. But he's gotten various people together to record tunes he wrote or tunes that famous solos that he's taken, like Rocky Top. And I went down there, went to Nashville, I don't know, 3 years ago or something, and Bela and Allison Brown and I each did a couple of tunes of Sonny's. And I don't know if this will ever come out. I haven't heard anything more about it, but Sonny is still one of my giant banjo heroes. He could play just like Earl, or he could play some really out stuff. He had a 6-string banjo once with an extra fifth string up here, tuned down to a low G. And I actually had a neck made for me that did that I had it for about a week, but every time I hit the third string, the low string would resonate. And I decided against doing that. So, but, and that's what I listen to bluegrass wise. Otherwise, it's all over the map. I love David Crosby, his music. Listened to the Doors yesterday for old time's sake. Always the Beatles, always Bob Dylan. I'm an old coot, that's who I listen to. I listened to Aaron Copland today. One of my huge and favorite influences, Aaron Copland. So I listen to his music a lot to this day. So those are the things I listen to.
Jamie, do we have any questions on the other chat line coming in?
Yeah, I do have a couple, and then Antonio, I know we'll probably start wrapping here, but thank you. Your answers have been so helpful, and thank you for your time today. But Alan asks, I'm curious to know if there are any particular compositions from Tony's earlier career, Skyline and pre-Skyline, that he still enjoys playing and which he is or might be particularly proud of.
That's interesting. Great question. There's one tune that is on my first album called The Jig Is Up, and it's in 7/4 time. I was listening to a lot of jazz back then. This would have been 1973 when I wrote it. I think my first album, Bluegrass Light, came out in 74. You can find it if you go to the Apple Music or Spotify. It's a double album basically on CD or streaming now called The Early Years. You're getting old when you have something called The Early Years. But it's a tune on my first album called The Jig Is Up, and I've been listening to a guy named Don Ellis, who was a big band leader, who would write these arrangements in crazy time signatures. 7/4 is not that crazy, but he'd have 13/8 or things like that.
Wow.
But I listened to that and then drove home after a gig, put on the record, and at about 5 a.m. started writing this tune. Let me see if I can just do it cold. Speaking of memory, this is something I've played in a long time. So this is in 7/4 time. Sorry. pretty proud of that tune. Pretty happy with it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Tony. And then the last one, I think from my end, we're being asked, do you have any, this is Bill. Bill asks, can you comment on miking and recording? Struggling.
What recording?
Miking and recording.
Oh, miking and recording.
Yeah, any kind of, I guess, interim advice for people trying to get a semi-decent sound?
This is going to sound real, well, for one thing, don't have the mic aimed right at your right hand, because then you're going to hear a lot of pick noise. So that's one thing I suggest. There are all sorts of strategies. I don't have any one way of doing it. I have to say, for this album, Shall We Hope, my latest album, I have the engineer, my favorite engineer of all time, who just nailed the sound. Lawson White is his name, and he unfortunately moved from Brooklyn, because I live in New Jersey, so it was easy to get to him. Now he's moved to Nashville. Like, they don't have enough engineers there already. But anyway, he would use 4 mics. He mic'd me with 4 mics. Just about every song on that album, there were 4 mics.
Wow.
And I don't remember the exact, he had like one over the neck here, one down here, and maybe one out a little ways. But he had one off to the side over here, interestingly enough.
Huh.
And he just, and the sound, it's the best sound I've ever gotten on an album. So
kind of parallel with the end of the banjo, or slightly behind it, or slightly in front of it?
then it just, no, I think maybe just slightly in front of it, but really
Okay.
off to the side, maybe just slightly in front, but just barely.
Cool.
And it worked. I mean, I don't know. He's just an incredible engineer. And it's, like I say, it's the best recorded sound I've ever gotten. If you're just using one mic, again, I would avoid the right hand. Have it, off to one side or a little below. You just, because you really, pick noise is the downfall. When you hear all that clacking, you really don't want that. So,
Yeah.
in a nutshell, that's just a really quick thing. But there are all sorts of different strategies. I did that when I was doing a session in New York City many years ago for some commercial or something. The engineer, this woman she was the engineer, and she put a mic up here. I don't know if you can see my hand there, but like way up here, far from the banjo. And I wasn't going to say anything because it was her studio. And she was the engineer, and she got a great sound. And it was way up here. So kind of depends on the room and all sorts of things. But yeah, I don't know that there's any one answer. But if you're using one mic, with the right hand,
Yeah.
So
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Dave, how you doing?
Yeah, I just do have one quick question. I'm curious, are you starting to book live shows this year, or?
There are a couple of things. I'm doing Rocky Grass out in Lyons, Colorado. That's happening.
Awesome.
I've got a couple of gigs. I'm doing a couple of things with Bruce Molsky with outdoor audiences. So it's beginning to happen. I've gotten my second shot, so I've had my 2 Moderna shots. So I'm feeling a little less apprehensive about traveling and doing gigs. So it's starting to open up anyway.
I think the most important question of the day, we talked about this right before we went live though, Tony, is will the beard continue to grow after we all go back to normal, or once we go back to playing with people, is it coming off like Baylor?
I don't know. It's a hard question.
I don't know.
Yes, a year ago, this past March, my son said, "Dad, why don't you grow your beard long?" I had a beard. I've had it for years, but it was pretty short. And I said, I got nothing better to do. It kept me occupied anyway. It kept me from getting bored. Just grow the beard. I've trimmed it back just a little bit over time, but it's I don't know. Like I was saying to you earlier, one day I look in the mirror and it's like, God, I got to shave this stupid thing off. And then the next day, that kind of looks cool. I guess I'll keep it for a while longer. So I could just have a grand awakening one morning and just get out the garden shears and just chop it off. I don't know. We'll have to see. I don't have a straight answer for you. I'm sorry.
There's a lot of praise for your beard in the comments today. So
thank you all.
All right.
I'm doing this thing. I'm posting. I have someone to post for me, and I started doing something called Tuesday Tunes from the Tomb. It's on Facebook and all those Twitter and all that stuff. Just tunes that I've written that have never seen the light of day. And I just posted one this past Tuesday, and someone said, "Shave the beard." I was like, oh, well, that's not very nice. So
Well, Marcus Luscombe makes a good point, and if and when you ever shave your beard, you should donate it to the Banjo Hall of Fame for a display case. It's mightily impressive. And on that bombshell,
that means a lot to me. That means a lot to me. Okay.
do you wanna give us a quick rendition as we go out and say farewell? And then Tony, thank you so much for your time. As always, it's always a pleasure seeing you. And where can people get the album? That's probably the most important part right now.
I mean, if you want the CD, you can order it on my website. I have a store there. You can order it there, but it's also on Spotify and Apple and all sorts of other places. So yeah,
awesome.
It's available.
Awesome. Go check it out.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Dave.
Absolutely.
Good to see you.
And I play Farewell Blues, except I already played it. Darn. I'll do John Hardy. Go out with a little John Hardy.
Sounds great.
That's
good.